Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Protection will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare committee in recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the state and local cybersecurity grant program, which is up for reauthorization this year. Since Congress signed the program into law 4 years ago, nearly $1 billion has been allocated to bolster the cybersecurity postures of state and local governments. Today, we will assess the program's strengths and weaknesses as we consider next steps. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. The threat of cyber attacks to U.S. networks and critical infrastructure is real and rising. Microsoft's 2024 Digital Defense Report estimates that its customers are targeted with more than 600 million attacks per day from nation-states and criminal actors. For years, the intelligence community has warned of the threat of state-sponsored cyber actors engaging in malicious activities against our critical infrastructure. As we've seen, these warnings have become a reality. With the persistent threat that groups like the Typhoons pose to IT and OT assets, any critical infrastructure sector could be the next to fall victim to attacks or have its data seized through a phishing scheme. As cyber actors become increasingly sophisticated and persistent, we can no longer be complacent when it comes to securing our critical infrastructure. We must take all steps necessary to ensure our nation's cyber preparedness and resilience. In doing so, it is essential that our state and local government partners are similarly well situated to respond to these threats. Despite often lacking resources and qualified talent for cybersecurity, state and local governments host the key pieces of critical infrastructure that keep our economy running. If left unprotected, this presents a huge vulnerability. To help state and local governments improve their cybersecurity postures, Congress passed the State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program in 2021. Since this program began, $838 million has been allocated to address cybersecurity risks and threats to information systems owned and operated by or on behalf of state, local, and territorial governments. The State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program is set to expire this September, at which point the program will not continue to receive federal funding unless reauthorized by Congress. As we have heard from many stakeholders, this program has undoubtedly improved and sometimes even established the cybersecurity posture for our states and localities. I am encouraged by the progress and applaud the efforts of our state and local governments to seize this opportunity to prioritize cybersecurity. With that said, we know the program does not come without its challenges. As we consider reauthorization, we want to understand any administrative burdens or barriers to ensure state, local, and territorial governments can focus on cyber resilience and preparedness. To that end, it is also Congress's responsibility to evaluate whether the state and local cybersecurity grant program is the most efficient and effective means of strengthening cybersecurity posture of state, local, and territorial governments. I'm here with an open mind and a vested interest in understanding how the program is working. Cybersecurity is a whole of the society challenge, meaning federal government must continue to support and strengthen cybersecurity at the state and local levels to protect our nation's networks and critical infrastructure. State and local governments must also continue to share information with each other. They play an important role in disseminating best practices, which could greatly benefit organizations with less mature cybersecurity programs. I want to thank our witnesses, who have all had firsthand experience with the state and local cybersecurity grant program, for being here today. I look forward to hearing your perspectives on the program and working with you to strengthen our collective defense against cyber threats. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for his opening statement.
Morning, and thank you to Chairman Garbarino for holding this subcommittee hearing on state and local cybersecurity grant programs. Also want to thank our witnesses for their participation, a nice blend of private sector and public sector witnesses that we have today. This program was established 4 years ago as the product of a bipartisan agreement from this committee. And as we consider further authorization, it's important to remember that cyber attacks hit Republican districts and Democratic districts. They're in blue states and red states. They're in urban areas, suburban areas, and rural areas. In my district, the 14th District of California in the Bay Area, the city of Hayward suffered a ransomware attack in the summer of 2023 that shut down the city's computer networks for more than 2 weeks. And just 2 months ago, Hayward began notifying individuals that personally identifiable information, including social security numbers and sensitive medical information, had been breached as a part of the ransomware incident. I know this story is not unusual, and I'm sure my colleagues have also heard from local governments impacted by cyber attacks and looking for help. With cyber attacks coming from criminal gangs and nation-state adversaries, We cannot leave our state and local governments to fend for themselves. Federal support for state and local governments is necessary to address the national security threat, and the state and local cybersecurity grant program has always reflected that understanding. By providing $1 billion to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, Congress took a major step in strengthening our country's cyber defenses. For example, with a $250,000 grant from this program, a water utility can expand real-time monitoring to better detect and respond to cyber incidents, finally addressing a long-standing resourcing challenge in the water sector that we've heard about on this subcommittee for years. When the state and local cybersecurity grant program was created, our primary concern was that ransomware epidemic that was plaguing our communities. That threat remains, but China's campaign to pre-position on our critical infrastructure for potential future destructive attacks is even more alarming. While much of our critical infrastructure is privately defended, some of our most vital services are provided by the public sector. Publicly owned and operated water and electric utilities, transportation systems, and emergency services could all be targets in destructive attacks by China or other adversaries. Reauthorizing the cybersecurity grant program is necessary to ensure we do not take our foot off the gas at this critical time, and passing a reauthorization bill before this program expires in September is one of my top priorities on the committee. What I've heard from stakeholders is an appreciation for the tremendous value of this program, and we'll hear that today from our witnesses. But they also have a desire for sustained, predictable, and consistent funding levels that will allow state and local governments to build on their progress and budget and plan their futures. The program operates under a partnership between FEMA and CISA, two important agencies that unfortunately have come under attack in recent months. By leveraging FEMA's grants, administration expertise, and CISA's cybersecurity expertise, this program has been able to deliver for state and local governments in ways that would be impossible without that partnership. Trump administration plans to eliminate FEMA and further cut CISA's workforce would devastate Homeland Security's ability to support state and local governments across a range of threats, including cyber attacks. The Cybersecurity Grant Program demonstrates the value of collaboration between DHS's components, and I hope we can work in a bipartisan way to further educate Secretary Noem about the tremendous value these agencies provide the American public. I'm also concerned by reports that FEMA has been pausing distributions of funding to implement cyber grants, along with other programs. China is not pausing. They continue their efforts to target our critical infrastructure, and we cannot pause either. The Trump administration must release cyber grant funds to states, territories, and tribes and comply with court orders against any illegal pauses. Again, I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing, the witnesses for their participation, and look forward to expertise from both public and private sector as we look to reauthorize this important program. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Robert Huber currently serves as the Chief Security Officer at Tenable. He oversees the organization's global security and research teams to reduce security risks to the company, its customers, and industry. Prior to his private sector career, Mr. Huber served in the U.S. Air Force and Air National Guard for 22 years. Mr. Alan Fuller serves as the Chief Information Officer for the state of Utah. In his role, he oversees all IT functions for state executive branch agencies aiming to improve innovation and government services through technology. He also serves as the Secretary and Treasurer of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers. The Honorable Kevin Kramer is the first Vice President of the National League of Cities, where he leads efforts of city, town, and village leaders to improve the quality of life for their residents. Additionally, Mr. Kramer serves as a councilman for Louisville, Kentucky, where he is the chair for the Minority Caucus, Vice Chair of Budget Committee, and member of the Government Oversight Audit Appointments Committee. Mr. Mark Raymond is the Chief Information Officer for the state of Connecticut, where he oversees the Department of Administrative Services, Bureau of Information Technology Solutions, and holds operational responsibilities for the state's technology infrastructure. Prior to his public service career, Mr. Raymond spent 21 years in the technology consulting industry where he supported federal, state, and local clients. I thank the witnesses for being here today. I now recognize Mr. Huber for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for convening this important hearing. I'm Bob Huber, Chief Security Officer, Head of Research and of Public Sector at Tenable, a cybersecurity exposure management company. Tenable serves 44,000 customers worldwide, including the federal government, as well as state, local, tribal, and territorial governments and critical infrastructure operators. State and local governments play a crucial role in managing and protecting critical infrastructure, such as water treatment facilities, energy grids, transportation networks. They are on the front lines of defending these systems from cyber attacks that could disrupt vital services, erode public confidence, and compromise national security. Protecting essential systems is more urgent than ever. In 2023, the China-backed cyber espionage group Volt Typhoon, known for targeting critical infrastructure, attacked a Massachusetts utility. While disruptions were avoided, the incident showed the growing sophistication of adversaries who could position themselves to perpetrate future attacks on critical infrastructure. In addition, ransomware attacks doubled between 2018 and 2024, causing over $1 billion in operational downtime for state and local governments. These threats highlight the need for robust cybersecurity measures and coordinated efforts among all levels of government and the private sector to detect, mitigate, and recover from these cyber threats. The State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program, or SLCGP, is a vital tool in addressing these challenges, providing $1 billion over 4 years to help state and local governments address cybersecurity risks. To receive funds, states have to follow a structured process, including establishing a cybersecurity planning committee that includes state and local officials. Together, they must develop a state cybersecurity plan that incorporates baseline requirements and alignment with cybersecurity best practices and international standards. States created different SLCGP programs. Some provided competitive grants where local governments could apply for funding for cybersecurity projects. Others provide shared services to local governments, such as multi-factor authentication, vulnerability management, or endpoint detection services. States like Connecticut, Utah, and Virginia are successful use cases of the SLCGP program. Virginia's whole state approach focuses on collaboration, enterprise-level visibility, and efficient resource allocation. Virginia provided free cybersecurity plan capability assessments to local entities, who could then apply for funding to address identified gaps through a streamlined application process. 80% of eligible localities applied for the funding, highlighting the need for assistance. Balanced central oversight with decentralized execution enabled Virginia to increase its overall cybersecurity resilience. SLCGP objectives include continuous monitoring, asset inventory, and vulnerability prioritization, which are all essential components of the exposure management approach. Exposure management shifts organizations from a reactive approach to proactive, risk-informed strategies across modern attack surfaces such as operational technology, Internet of Things, as well as cloud configurations. This proactive approach helps state and local agencies anticipate and mitigate risk before they impact vital systems. SLCGP has significantly contributed to enhancing cybersecurity across state and local governments by providing essential funding, fostering collaboration, and encouraging strategic and proactive planning based on best practices. It has notably strengthened relationships between state and local officials through the cybersecurity planning committees and their collective development of the cybersecurity plans. To continue and to build on SLCGP's success, Tenable recommends reauthorizing the program with the following improvements. Ensure sustainable funding by extending the program's duration and enable long-term planning. Maintaining alignment with recognized standards and frameworks, such as the NIST cybersecurity framework. Reducing the administrative burdens and providing clear guidance through simplified applications. And lowering and leveling cost share requirements for effective planning. Continuing to encourage whole-of-state and proactive exposure management strategies, and engaging the private sector and stakeholders to address evolving threats and best practices. Continued success of the SLCGP program also depends on having qualified cybersecurity professionals at all levels to manage it. Tenable supports the enactment of the Cyber Pivot Act, to address workforce shortages, to reskill workers, and create diverse pathways into government cybersecurity careers. Thank you again for your attention to cybersecurity, continued support of the SLCGP, and for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to working with you to secure our nation's cyber assets, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. I now recognize Mr. Fuller for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Alan Fuller, Chief Information Officer for the state of Utah, a role to which I was appointed by Governor Cox in March of 2021. And as CIO for the state, I lead the Division of Technology Services, which is the consolidated IT organization for all of the executive branch agencies of the state. As part of my team, I oversee the Cyber Center, which is responsible for defending state IT systems against cybercrime. I'm also the Secretary-Treasurer for the National Association of State Chief Information Officers, or NASCIO. NASCIO is a national leader and advocate for technology policy at all levels of government and has championed substantial collaboration between states and the federal government to improve cybersecurity, preparedness, and protect our nation's critical infrastructure. So as both CIO for the state of Utah and as a NASCIO officer, I hope to highlight the many successes of the state and local cybersecurity program, or SLCGP, today. This program has provided significant support to states and to local governments as we have worked together to improve our cybersecurity posture and to address vulnerabilities. Over the past decade in Utah, state, county, city governments have witnessed significant escalations in cyber incidents. Initially, attacks were less frequent and less sophisticated, often targeting basic vulnerabilities. However, recent years have seen a surge in complex ransomware attacks, data breaches, and phishing campaigns specifically designed to exploit government systems. This evolution reflects a broader trend where malicious actors increasingly target public sector entities seeking to disrupt services, extort funds, and to compromise sensitive data. Local governments in particular face challenges in keeping pace with these threats due to budget constraints and limited cybersecurity expertise, making them more susceptible to these evolving cyber risks. In Utah, we applied for SLCGP funds in 2022 and received approximately $13 million of federal funds and $4 million in matching state funds for local cybersecurity efforts. Assessments and audits were conducted to identify the strength of cybersecurity defenses around the state, including cities, counties, and higher education entities. Results found that cybersecurity systems were significantly underdeveloped in many cases, leaving local government entities with serious risks. Note that many of these cities and counties have limited resources with very little or no IT support. The SLCGP is being utilized to address those concerns by providing much-needed tools to local entities. With funding secured through the SLCGP and corresponding state appropriations, a comprehensive cybersecurity initiative has been deployed across 140 governmental entities in the state. These include 23 counties, 94 municipalities, and 23 special districts. Through this effort, endpoint security has been provisioned for over 26,000 devices, and cybersecurity awareness training is being delivered to 31,000 local government employees. The program includes scheduled engagements with local leaders to guide the progression of statewide cybersecurity initiatives. The results have been extremely positive. We have blocked 7 major cyber attack incidents in the last 6 months alone. I will speak to 2 of these. Shortly before Christmas, the CIO of a local airport urgently contacted me about a cyber attack in progress. Cyber criminals attempted to deploy ransomware on the airport's IT systems, which would have been disastrous, especially during the busy holiday travel season. Our Cyber Center team immediately worked with the airport's IT team to address the issue. Fortunately, SLCGP funds have provided security tools that were able to detect and interrupt the attack as it was happening. The common tooling and established relationships with local staff enabled a rapid response that limited the impact of the attack. As a result, the airport service was not interrupted and no ransom was paid. Second, recently a 911 emergency dispatch center in Utah was the victim of a ransomware attack on systems that provide 911 services. Again, SLCGP funds have provided security tools that detected and interrupted the attack as it was happening. Common tooling and established relationships enabled a rapid response that limited the attack's impact. Critical 911 dispatch services were able to continue in one of our biggest counties. Utah's positive experience with this grant program is not an outlier. SLCGP has allowed many states to embrace a whole-of-state approach to cybersecurity. By approaching cybersecurity jointly, information is widely shared and incident response is more effective. States have been able to use SLCGP to provide vital technology services that many smaller communities simply would not otherwise be able to implement. The state and local cybersecurity grant program helps stakeholders develop a solid foundation on which to continue to strengthen their defenses and to modernize both their technology and their processes. I encourage the subcommittee to extend funding for the program. I look forward to discussing it today and to answering your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I now recognize Mr. Kramer for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am Councilman Kevin Kramer from Louisville Metro Government in Kentucky, and I serve as the first Vice President of the National League of Cities. I'm honored to speak on behalf of both my city and the 19,000 cities, towns, and villages represented by the National League of Cities. NLC is committed to strengthening the federal-local partnership that supports our communities. Prior to my current role, I chaired NLC's Information Technology and Communications Committee. I also work as a teacher at a small all-girls high school. I appreciate this subcommittee's focus on reauthorizing the state and local cybersecurity grant program, and I'm here to share both our local experience in Louisville and broader perspectives from cities across the country. Local governments are frequent targets of cyber attacks from both criminal organizations and nation-state actors. We are responsible for sensitive data, public payment systems, and critical infrastructure. When city networks are attacked, emergency services may be disrupted, personal data can be exposed, and entire communities can be impacted. Recovering from these incidents often costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds of work hours. As the committee has noted in previous hearings, local governments face serious capacity constraints. This is especially true of small and rural communities. Of the 19,000 municipalities nationwide, over 16,000 have populations under 10,000 people. Many have no dedicated IT staff at all. Even larger cities often struggle to hire and retain qualified cybersecurity professionals. Yet smaller size does not equal lower risk. Every community is vulnerable. Louisville Metro government has received funding through the state and local cybersecurity grant program for 2 fiscal years. The most recent grant helped support the creation of the Kentucky Cyber Threat Intelligence Cooperative, or KCTIC. This is a new platform for sharing timely, actionable cyber threat information among regional governments and private sector partners. We built it to address delays in the existing systems for threat reporting and communication. KCTIC allows anonymous threat data from cooperative members to be shared in near real time. This grassroots, multi-sector effort strengthens the entire region's cyber resilience, not just Louisville's, and it wouldn't be possible without this grant program. The state and local cybersecurity grant program is a vital component of our national security strategy. It fosters state-local collaboration, builds awareness among local leaders, and enables proactive planning. But for the program to reach its full potential, improvements are needed. First, the one-size-fits-all pass-through model limits efficiency. Larger jurisdictions like Louisville are capable of managing direct federal grants and should be able to apply without going through the state. We urge Congress to create a complementary direct funding track for eligible larger municipalities. Second, the application process must be more accessible. Small communities face major barriers: tight deadlines, complex requirements, and limited staff capacity. These are often the very communities that would benefit the most. Simplifying the application process and extending timelines would make participation more realistic for them. We're also encouraged by emerging models like multi-jurisdictional grants managed by state municipal associations. These allow technical services to be delivered to many communities at once, an approach far more efficient than requiring each town to stand up its own cybersecurity team. Just as most people take their cars to a qualified mechanic, small governments need trusted partners to handle complex cyber tasks. Above all, We ask Congress to reauthorize and fully fund this program with predictability and consistency. Without that, local governments are less likely to make the necessary investments in planning and assessment that lead to strong applications and long-term resilience. Cybersecurity is a whole-of-nation challenge. It demands a true intergovernmental partnership. The state and local cybersecurity grant program is a cornerstone of that partnership. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. I now recognize Mr. Raymond for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell, and members of the subcommittee, I am Mark Raymond, Chief Information Officer for the state of Connecticut. I'm responsible for all the technology of 39 executive branch agencies, including network and internet services for our K-12 schools, our libraries, our universities, and over 2/3 of the state's municipal governments. I'm an active member of NASCIO and the longest-serving state CIO in the country. This history has given me direct involvement with the long advocacy for dedicated cybersecurity funding. The threats posed by criminal actors are numerous and unceasing. Each year, cyber attacks become more threatening and the risk posed to residents become more dire. State and local governments serve as stewards of a civil society, working to ensure community stability, predictability, and the well-being of our residents. These public servants are the teachers in our classrooms, the police officers who respond to distress, the doctors and nurses that care for our neighbors suffering with addiction. They protect the water we drink, the food we eat, and much more. All of these services, however, rely heavily on technology and data. However, the fast-growing cyber risks have found many jurisdictions unprepared. This program is a valuable resource in addressing this need. Through this grant, Connecticut has expanded offerings to local governments. Equally as important is the spirit of trust that the grant has fostered between state and local governments. Cyber incident responders are collaborating before attacks take place, instead of during them or after them. Preventing attacks is far better than recovering from them. For the fiscal '22 grant year, we awarded close to $3 million, with more than $2.1 million of that going directly to local governments. Awards for the FY23 program year are expected to be over $7 million in total, with $4.3 million to local governments. One of the benefits of the program has been a systemic assessment of local government risks. Connecticut partnered with our National Guard to evaluate cybersecurity risks using the NIST cybersecurity framework. Sadly, only 27.7% of our municipalities were assessed at low risk. These periodic assessments that are supported by this grant program ensure that the actions we take produce measurable risk responses. Those with high risks demonstrated a lack of vulnerability scanning, multi-factor authentication, employee cybersecurity training, malware prevention tools, and incident response plans. This grant directly addresses those findings. 51 awards were made in Connecticut, of which 19 addressed incident planning and governance, 31 improved multi-factor authentication and ransomware protections. The last award also supported the Cyber Nutmeg, which is a 2-day exercise where all municipalities and critical infrastructure operators are invited to participate. This unique state-level exercise raises awareness to the need to fill this gap. It exercises the incident plans that some are newly created and improves relationships that are needed when incidents occur. Unfortunately, these grant program funds for FY22 covered less than half of the requested need. We plan to address this growing gap with the remaining grant year funding. Though much has already been accomplished under SLCGP, more can be done, and here are a few of our suggestions. First is that ongoing dedicated funding for cybersecurity would be important. Many local governments are reluctant to start a cybersecurity program without ongoing funding to support it. Standardizing the matching percentage across all of the grant years would also significantly simplify grants administration. And finally, making shared services a default position for states and local government to reduce the administrative burden required for each locality to sign on to the shared solution. This would reduce costs and improve statewide efficiency. We strongly believe that it is better to continue to improve this program rather than to allow it to expire. The grant improves our nation's cybersecurity defenses. As state and local governments take on additional responsibilities for cybersecurity, supplemental funds will help meet this increased burden. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to answering what questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond. Your point about preventing is better than recovering. You know, I had our county got hit, and they were down for almost a year. It's very important that you're all here today, and getting this reauthorized and fixed, I think, is a very important goal that we all have, and I'm really happy that we have members here to ask questions. We're going to start with each member, go from Republican to Democrat, 5 minutes of questioning each. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Raymond, when it comes to local governments and their awareness of the grant programs and where they live and breathe or where they exist, how does that work? Does the government itself reach down into these local governments? And which ones are we touching? Are we touching all of them?
Thank you for the question, Representative. They're all invited to the discussion. We have formed regional subcommittees that include representatives from state, local, school districts.
When you say regional subcommittees, can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, Connecticut is divided into 5 administrative regions. So we do not have county government in Connecticut. So it's just the state and then 169 municipalities. So we have organized our emergency response into 5 districts. And so each one of those emergency management and cybersecurity groups have their own planning committee that it is all of the chief executives and emergency management and cybersecurity professionals in that group are invited to the table in those discussions.
So it makes it easier for the state to understand what exactly is happening in cybersecurity when it comes to the grant profile.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Kramer, you got something to add to that?
Louisville is the largest city in the state of Kentucky. We do have counties in the Commonwealth, and the grant that we are currently using came directly to Metro government in Louisville, and
Is every county aware of the grant system itself, and how they can grab a hold of that?
Those that are members of NACO, the National Association of Counties, are well aware because NACO is pushing this out as an issue that they should be very much interested in working with. In Louisville, it's not just Louisville that's taking advantage of the grant, though. We're the largest city in the state. We're also very near, being on the river, very near Indiana. We are working across the entire region. We've reached out to the universities, both the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville. We're working with the National Guard. And so it's a program that goes beyond just what we're doing in Louisville. It captures a good part of our state.
Mr. Fuller?
Excuse me. Yes. So in the state of Utah, what we're doing is tools.
The city of Utah?
State of Utah.
Ah, okay. Sorry.
Tools, training, and relationship building. And so we're over 75% coverage with all the cities and counties, and we hope to get that closer to 100% as we go.
The entire state is aware of this.
Oh, yeah.
That's remarkable. Mr. Hubbard?
I have no comment. That's outside my area of expertise. I rely on these gentlemen. I'm a vendor.
Welcome to the committee, sir. When it comes to the relationship between state and local government, would you say that the return on the investment from these grant programs are beneficial? And I'll start with you, Mr. Raymond, because you said that you did not utilize all the assets that were funded. I missed the year.
We had double the requests than we were able to fund. So we did not have any excess funds. We had double the requests in the first year of the grant program, and we expect that to continue. So I think that does demonstrate both the awareness that we have across the state, especially for our municipalities, and upwards, we took very little funding at the state level. There is a division between what you can take at the state level and what is, and almost all of the funds went to local governments.
But absolutely necessary, because this committee is trying to maintain its footing when it comes to grant programs for cybersecurity, cyber risk, cyber threat. We need to hear from those on the other side to say, yes, this is an absolute need, because in my personal opinion, this is the next phase of evolution when it comes to warfare. So, and protecting our citizens is absolute. And as the metaverse is pulling or cutting or freezing grant programs currently, I would hate to see this happen in such an important space.
Yeah.
Mr. Kramer, did I go to you? If not, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you. I would argue that yes, it is essential. We, in Louisville, we hired 2 people to do the work. We were hoping for 4. The work that needs to be done is broader than the work we're able to accomplish under the current program. So absolutely want to see this go forward. The plan is to reach out again to the major universities in town, and then ultimately to filter down even to the public school systems. It's amazing how much data is held in the school systems and how much that data is compromised. And as everyone knows, the bad actors are looking for the easy access. And so we're doing our best to reach down to the level where we can improve security at that lowest level.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Swalwell from California, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Kramer of Louisville, you have one of the most important jobs here. You are protecting the nation's bourbon supply, so thank you. I know our chairman and many of my colleagues, thank you. But you did, in all seriousness, mention a weakness of the program as it exists right now, which is it doesn't have much agility, or maybe you said like bandwidth to understand like the differences between sizes of cities. Like, how would you structure a future reauthorization to better reflect that and better target where the need is?
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate that. I think the first bit of the answer is we need to recognize that the larger cities like Louisville, for example, we do have the resources. We have a person on staff who his primary responsibility is cybersecurity. But we're a half an hour drive from Elizabethtown. There was a movie made about that place. It's a fairly small town out in the middle of bourbon country. And they don't have the resources to do this. But we do have a very active state league of cities, an organization of municipalities. Allowing the grant to go through them instead of through the state would assure that that money actually made its way to local governments, and it would also allow the state league to work together with those other cities and hire a person that would be able to work with all of them and not just with one city like our own. And again, it reaches into the school systems. There are some school systems in the state of Kentucky that the highest paid positions in the county are in the school system. And I just want to drill home, that's an area that I think folks overlook. There's a lot of data that's handled there, and we need to do the best we can to reach out to that community as well.
Absolutely. And Mr. Raymond, can I ask, as somebody who has administered millions of dollars of these grants to many jurisdictions, municipalities, agencies, what are some of the weaknesses that you've seen among some of the recipients? Like if you had a new tranche or a new reauthorization, like what have you learned from this that makes a candidate more eligible or makes a candidate least eligible as you're thinking about where these funds should go?
Well, admittedly, the program did have a slow start, right? And I think any kind of new grant program, the clarity around getting people to understand what it is to be eligible and what people really needed within their environment was probably the most difficult challenge for us. And again, the assessment, the cybersecurity assessments that were part of the first year were absolutely critical for building for all of our municipalities an understanding of what their risks were and how we would address it. I think it goes to the earlier question of did they know? When we have these assessments, they now know. And so I would say that continuing that to demonstrate the improvements would be absolutely critical. For additional funding, I do think that I understand the desire in the construct of the program to have, to wean states off the program with the declining match or the increasing state match. However, that's complicated with the change in the funding as well. I think having a stable match over the life of the program makes it far easier to administer as people are working across the different grant years. Should the desire be to still shift some of that burden back to the states through funding, you can do that through the overall funding of the program and not the mix of the two. And I think that we had a lot of people applying for the first year at a 90% reimbursement rate, and then we're looking at will we get that same kind of participation as the rates fall and local governments' budgets remain tight.
Thanks. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, I believe strongly in federalism, fiscal responsibility, and the importance of empowering local communities and not expanding the bureaucracies of, quite frankly, the federal government. As we assess the state and local cybersecurity grant program, we need to ensure that our limited federal resources are being used effectively and are actually reaching the communities most at risk. And I say that in the context of being a former county executive in Tennessee, serves as the CEO of the county, and so I can attest to the fact that some of these pass-through grants administered by the states were incredibly important to my county, which was a rural county. Emergency services, fire, and cyber were all my departments. And so again, and I get your perspective on the stable match because again, as a rural county where we have limited funding mechanisms and quite frankly, an ever-growing school system, there's a friction there of how do you fund these mechanisms, which as my colleague stated, the future of warfare is on the cyber battlefield. But that being said, Mr. Huber, you've worked to secure systems against the threat from Volt Typhoon, a CCP-backed group of hackers who both have sophisticated abilities and specialize in targeting the most vulnerable points in its target systems. In your testimony, you mentioned their attack on Littleton Electric, Light, and Water Department in Massachusetts. In my district and across the country, we have a diverse range of electric providers, large corporations, rural providers, as I mentioned. In your experience, how strong is the awareness of cyber threats among smaller, less resource organizations that provide critical infrastructure? And again, I go back to Tennessee, but probably much like rural Kentucky, where we have a patchwork of these smaller communities where we're scrapping for resources to figure out how do we, quite frankly, protect not only our infrastructure, but our citizens, sir?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I've had the pleasure of working with municipalities that the IT person was the IT person and the database administrator and the system administrator and responsible for security as a part-time job. So as you might imagine, any administrative burden that might be involved in applying for the grant would be significant for an entity such as that, smaller size, but make no mistake, those smaller rural entities, that could be the hydro station that fuels a larger municipality. Mm-hmm. That's a national security and an economic impact to the region. So as we heard from gentlemen here, education and awareness is key to educating those folks who have probably dual roles or multi-hat roles for protecting that piece of critical infrastructure from nation-state attackers. As someone who's been in the trenches and a National Guard member in Title 32 and state active duty supporting state critical infrastructure components, there's a significant shortage of resources and knowledge about nation-state level attackers. So I think it's important to recognize that this funding is key in raising the bar of foundational cyber controls for all of those entities.
And I want to focus primarily with the other three witnesses on rural communities. And one of my concerns, again, my background coming from a rural community, is that competition that you see between, say, a Nashville and my community. But yet, from an assessment standpoint, I would argue some of your rural communities are your most vulnerable points of entry. So how do we make sure that we're prioritizing, basically, not, and take size out of it for a moment, but a needs assessment, understanding that, again, whether it's distribution of broadband, whether it's protecting points of entry, et cetera. Mr. Fuller?
Thank you very much. Let me just say, I really appreciate your comment that these attacks are very much like war. And this committee knows very well that we live in a very, very dangerous world, that we're constantly under attack, including our smallest and most rural communities. So with the program that we rolled out tools to all of our communities, including the rural communities. And for the most rural who don't even have sufficient IT resources, we're able to make resources available to help them install those tools. And then we're also able to provide training for those people. So we're absolutely committed to getting this program to our small cities and counties and special districts.
Mr. Kramer?
Thank you. Again, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we need to recognize, it's a matter of how quickly we share that information as well. When a cyber attack happens, what they're trying to do in one place, one community, is likely happening somewhere else. And again, I think that smaller communities, the rural communities where my colleagues have testified that you've got a person who has 3 different jobs. If they aren't aware of what to look for, it makes it much more difficult. They often don't find out until it's too late. So one of the things we're hoping we can get the federal government to do is recognize that they collect up a lot of this data about cyber attacks, but they collect it up and hold it. It would be very useful to us at the local level if, as soon as they knew about a cyber attack, they shared that information with entities as quickly as they could, so that folks at the local level could start looking at their own systems and see if someone's trying to get in the same way.
Yes, sir, and I'm out of time, but Mr. Raymond, a final thought?
I would just say that we view cybersecurity as a team sport. We view those that are better resourced in a good position to help those that aren't. So we do have municipalities who help each other, larger ones helping smaller ones, and smaller ones who are relying upon the state to help deliver services. We do run all of the network services, so it provides a unique ability for us to provide specialized security services to everyone in our jurisdiction, which is one way to make the limited dollars we have go a lot further.
Sir, thank you to the witness. Mr. Chairman, apologies for going over.
No, of course, not a problem. Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Magaziner, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairman. The state and local cybersecurity grant program is an essential resource to help states and municipalities protect themselves against cyber attacks. This grant program helps secure critical infrastructure like schools, hospitals, electric grids, water systems. And in my home state of Rhode Island, it has been instrumental in providing cybersecurity training, for example, for staff at state agencies and municipalities so they can better protect taxpayer data, securing schools and academic institutions from ransomware attacks, and protecting critical infrastructure from being infiltrated by hackers. I am concerned by reports of potential delays and cuts to these grants by the Trump and Musk administration, and I'm glad to see that, at least on this subcommittee, there appears to be bipartisan support for continuing the program in a robust form. But you would forgive us for being concerned, because in addition to the reports of delays, we have heard that the Trump and Musk administration has been firing staff at CISA and at FEMA, the 2 agencies responsible for administering this program. And we have also heard from Secretary Noem herself that she plans to, quote, eliminate FEMA and significantly shrink CISA. She said that in her Senate confirmation hearing. This would be a tremendous mistake. The threat that we face from foreign malign actors, from criminal organizations, to critical infrastructure, to cybersecurity, to our cybersecurity are immense. The Chinese are working overtime, putting tens of thousands of people toward trying to infiltrate every system, even in the smallest towns in this country. Same with the Russians, same with the Iranians, the North Koreans, and of course, criminal cyber gangs as well. We've had significant breaches in Rhode Island as a result. This is not the time to take our foot off the gas, as the Secretary said was her intention during her Senate confirmation hearing. And unfortunately, this is part of a pattern, because when she was governor of North Dakota, Secretary Noem was one of only 2 governors in the entire country to refuse to accept state cybersecurity grants in 2022. Her administration called them, quote, wasteful spending. In 2023, yet again, she was now the only governor in the entire country to refuse these grants for her home state. And of course, we have seen that the administration is not off to a great start with its own cybersecurity practices, with service members' lives being put at risk from confidential information being discussed in an unsecured group chat, and of course, Elon Musk's army of unvetted interns going through everybody's personal data with very little transparency. But given that backdrop, it is more important than ever that Congress send the message that cybersecurity still matters to us, that we do not consider it to be wasteful spending, and particularly we want to continue to support states, municipalities, utilities in our home states with this program. So I have limited time, but Mr. Fuller, can you elaborate on any reports of delays, cuts, or pauses to this program? What have you seen so far, and what would the negative consequences be?
Thank you, and I appreciate your point that there's a lot of bipartisan support for this program to continue. Certainly the risk doesn't take politics into account. One of the concerns we have about the program is some of our states chose not to participate because they were afraid that the funding would not continue on, and they were afraid to launch a program that might then get cut, and that created some hesitation for some states. For us, we're all in with the program, and it has been extremely beneficial. I mentioned in my testimony, we've blocked 7 major attacks in the last 6 months alone. And so we would hope that we could extend the funding could be extended by Congress without delays. Those delays could cause serious problems in adoption of the program.
Thank you. And Mr. Raymond, if FEMA is eliminated and CISA is significantly cut, as Secretary Noem has promised, what impact would that have on the ability of your state and others to maintain strong cybersecurity and take advantage of programs like this one?
I do believe that FEMA and our emergency management in Connecticut, along with CISA on the security side, have been great partners with us on this cyber battle. State and local governments are not prepared to fight this kind of cyber engagement with foreign nations. I would say in combination with the reductions to MSISAC and CISA support, additional responsibilities are falling on the states to fight these battles. Should further CISA reductions or FEMA reductions, for that matter, be put in place, I would say it would diminish our ability to help the municipalities that are a part of our jurisdiction and defend on behalf of the state.
All right, thank you. I'm over time, so I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Gentlemen, we've heard from you all today. There's definitely a need for the program. I want to focus on one, has it been successful so far? And 2, what changes would we make? And you've all suggested a couple. And Mr. Raymond, you started by saying when you first did with this in your state, there were 27% of the municipalities were low risk, so 73% were not low risk. Now that this program's in place, have you done another review? What number is low risk now?
We are currently doing the reassessment now. We do not have an updated set of numbers on that. We do know that the implementation of the 51 grants that we have would directly raise the ratings and lower the risk for folks who are out there.
Wonderful. Mr. Huber, you're a vendor, so you're dealing with all these municipalities. You know what they're using, what they needed. Can you please just describe what these grants have been able to help some of the municipalities you've dealt with, like what systems have been put in place, what they had and now what they have. I mean, I think people really, we need to hear, the actual benefit of what you've done with this grant money.
Sure, thank you for the question. Yeah, so, one of the first foundational components of any cybersecurity program is having awareness of what you have. You have to know what you have to be able to defend it. Sounds easy, significant challenge for most organizations, even mature organizations. That's a challenge to understand the breadth of the footprint, certainly at a state level, let alone rural areas as well. So what we've seen folks do is deploy solutions that allow them to understand what they have in their purview, what's exposed. And to the gentleman's point regarding risk assessments, you have to know what you have to conduct that risk assessment. So that's step one. We've seen them deploying that successfully. And then you want to take that just a step further. Now I know what I have. What am I vulnerable to? What misconfigurations, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities do I have there? And how do I prioritize those from a response perspective? Because I have limited resources to go and mitigate or reduce those risks. So now I'm looking at, what are my resources available to go and reduce the risk across the entire enterprise without regard to the size of the municipality involved, right? Because it could be that when they do these risk assessments, some smaller rural regions might have the highest risk compared to larger metros. And what we've seen is successfully organizations assess what they have, being able to analyze them, look for exposures across the attack footprint, and then focus on a prioritized process of addressing these vulnerabilities.
That's great. So they're using the grant money to map their system, and now they're starting, because it's a multi-year grant, so they're mapping their system, they're finding out what doors need locks, and now they're implementing it and using technology for, to protect those doors into their system.
Yeah, and I think a great point is sustainable funding. And I hate to say to use as an example, but some people when they wake up, they have a day job. It's not to fix vulnerabilities. That's not their job. Their job is to make the systems run. And, they go patch the systems, and they're like, hey, mission accomplished. We're done here. And tomorrow you get up and read the news, and you're like, more vulnerabilities. You have to do this again. It's a hamster wheel to an effect. So people have to have not only resource and fund for that, it's now a part of your job for some percentage of your time beyond what your day job is. And people just understand that's how life is.
Thank you very much. So under the grant program, there's some requirements in the law. One of them is for there to be a submission of a cybersecurity plan. And this is for the three gentlemen on the right who actually, I think, had to determine these cybersecurity plans. There's a lot that's got to be part of it. What is working as part of the plans? Is there something that we should include that's not in or is the law overburdensome by including too many things in the plan that's not necessary? What do you all think? Mr. Fuller, we can start with you.
Thank you. I think the good thing about the plan is that it gave states some flexibility to create their own plan. And you can see between Connecticut and Utah, two very separate plans where they primarily put funds down to local entities, and we primarily provided tools, training, and relationships down to local entities. So I feel like that part of the law was successful and good.
Should not be changed. Yeah. Mr. Kramer?
I'm going to leave that to the folks who actually do the cybersecurity stuff.
Okay. Mr. Raymond?
I'd say the formation of the cyber plan was really hopeful to focus in a structured way on what the risks were and what we could do together to lower those risks. There was a tremendous amount of collaboration in the development of the plan, which I think furthered the mission of, hey, we're all in this together, and hope to get the message out to all of the municipalities that this was important for their success. So I think the combination of collaboration and structure in those plans and the direction that set was very hopeful for statewide efforts.
Sounds like that part of the statute is something that we should not change. It should be kept. No, wonderful. All right, we're going to start a second round of questions. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for his second round of 5 minutes.
Mr. Huber, I think you hit the nail on the head explaining exactly how the process should work. Is that even a possibility or a probability? Because remember, you're talking to the United States of America right now. And I want you to think about that. I don't know where you're from. Kentucky, probably. I'm from Texas, obviously, a little bitty town. And the reach, and we hate the federal government. I could throw that out there. Honestly, we don't want them in and around us at all. However, with the threat or the risk to threat when it comes to cybersecurity, the cyberspace, how do we make this work? The plan that Mr. Raymond laid out piggybacks exactly what you said, but we have to touch every single person in the United States of America. And I can assure you, the four of you sitting in front of us, you're not the first four that's ever sat in front of us and laid this out. But it keeps, how do we, I mean, this is almost the simplest question I ask is, how do we fix this problem? Or is it a possibility? Because we can just keep talking about it all day long. We can keep funding these grants and throwing it out there, and we're just going to get attack after attack. You said the problem is when the attack happens, we're retrospective. It's a done deal. And then we have to raise awareness of those that didn't get hit. Who's doing that? So, well, I've had CISA come out to my district. I've had the FBI come out to my district, talk to the nursing homes, the schools. And guess what? The things that they laid out, a month later, something else showed up. Literally, how do we fix this?
Yeah, thank you for the question. A great question. We have to raise the bar across the board. There's foundational cyber components.
What does the bar even look like?
I think the NIST cybersecurity framework.
You and I are going to have a pretty good, healthy debate here in 3 minutes and 16 seconds, because every time, you see where I'm going with this.
I do, absolutely. Yeah, so the NIST cybersecurity framework provides excellent foundational controls. But to your point, AI was not on my list of risks 3 years ago, and now it is. And guess what we're doing? We're developing those foundational components for artificial intelligence and how we defend and how we detect for that type of capability. So we're always going to be in that race of emerging technology, unfortunately for us. But those foundational components still hold true for the vast majority of threats that exist today. And I think what we heard is very key of getting the message out, which is that communication and collaboration, whether that's through JCDC under CISA, or whether that's through some of these fusion centers we heard of at the state level, where they're disseminating information. It is a collective sport at the end of the day, and we all need that information to be able to respond as quickly as possible.
The sheer processing speed, now we're like past exascale computing. Magnolia, Texas, can't defend against that. We have nefarious actors that have the computational capabilities to destroy a country. How do I protect District 8 in Texas?
I think, and this is not normally how you start a security program, but you should start with incident response. You need to have surge capabilities and resources to respond to an incident. And to your point, unfortunately, it will happen. We have data that shows it will happen to even the most mature organizations. So having those capabilities, and a lot of times those surge capabilities, and I've been in this role, come from the National Guard, they come from CISA and other organizations to provide us intelligence we don't have to collectively respond as an industry, and that also raises the bar.
I mean, but how much is that? I can't even repave the roads in my forest right now. So now here we're talking about dollar bills. And I can only imagine that protective layer is going to help me fix this problem. I mean,
Yeah, there's certainly data points available of known exploited vulnerabilities. That's something we use as an industry to prioritize. Like, we know these are actively being exploited against these organizations. You want to make sure that when you're applying resources against the problem, it's a prioritized approach, whether it's through the program assessments that these organizations complete to identify the highest risk, or whether it's vulnerabilities that you see day in and day out to prioritize those first. I know within Tenable, we have data that says, unfortunately, if a new vulnerability comes out that affects major operating systems, as an example, it takes most organizations a few weeks to address those vulnerabilities. And by the way, they only fix about half of them during the course of that 2 weeks. So there's a known exposure that we all accept. And like I said, I'll foot stomp this, having that good response plan of how you coordinate reaction to those events becomes critical.
thank you. You'll back, sir.
Gentleman yields back, and I get the gentleman's point about there might not be a way to stop these. How do we stop them? I don't know if we can stop them, but being able to respond and get things back online, I think is at least part of the goal here. I now recognize the gentleman from California, the ranking member, Mrs. Swalwell, for his second 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd welcome the opportunity with the four of you here to give us a real-time update on the threat environment and what you're seeing as to the type of the attack, the ask of the attack, if it's ransomware, your ability to work with the federal government, for example, the Bureau, when an attack occurs, and the origin of the attack. Is it still primarily Russia, Eastern Europe, criminal gangs for ransomware, and then as far as phishing attacks and intellectual property theft, is that primarily China? So I'll just, Mr. Huber, start with you. If you each spend about a minute on this, I think we'd get a good cross-sector update.
Yeah, I think it's heavily dependent on the sector the entity operates in. You do see all those actors across all sectors. And unfortunately, it's become easier. There's things such as ransomware as a service, as an example. You can buy access to systems and companies at your will without having to conduct any actual attacks themselves. And then, of course, we always have the nation-state actors in
So
there.
it's like investing in the stock market? You just like buy an index fund of ransomware attacks?
That's exactly it. Yeah, so if I wanted to compromise your machine, I might buy access from somebody who already has access to your machine. So I'm not actually conducting the activity myself.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, so I think, we're seeing a mixed bag, and the problem becomes, to Congressman Luttrell's point, is, trying to defend against all of those different types of actors, whether it's, financially motivated, ideology motivated, nation state motivated. They all have different intents for what their targets are. So you have to understand, to a great extent, what your attackers look like, and that's, again, where some of that information through law enforcement or CISA or JCDC is very useful. JCDC is a part of CISA. They coordinated responses for Log4j, massive vulnerability that affected the economy and the world for that matter, one of the largest ones of my career. They did a fantastic job of sharing what works, what doesn't, and getting us intel quickly that we can action.
Great, thank you. Mr. Fuller.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So the types of attacks, first of all, the end users are typically the biggest vulnerability. So we see things like phishing attacks, business email compromise. I'd like to give you a very specific example that we just had the last few weeks. Utah's an alcohol control state. We have retail stores that sell alcohol. We had criminals calling these liquor stores, representing themselves as members of the government, and saying that they needed to change settings in their credit card readers. The credit card readers, the settings they were trying to change were trying to make it so the card didn't have to be present. It was a blatant attempt to try to hack the credit card readers of our liquor stores. We've seen, just in the recent past, some business email compromise has been very damaging. We've seen they try to do things like convince state employees to change bank routing numbers to redirect funds, so it goes to the criminals instead of to the place it's supposed to go. And the primary attackers come from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and we've seen quite a bit from Nigeria. I would also just mention to some of the comments before that with artificial intelligence technology, unfortunately, I see the problem getting worse, not better. It used to be with phishing type emails, you would see typos, incorrect grammar, you could kind of spot that something wasn't quite right. Unfortunately, the criminals know how to use artificial intelligence as well. And we just had an incident where we had over 400 phishing emails, every one a different subject line, every one a different text, all written beautifully. And unfortunately, all bearing malware that could compromise systems. So unfortunately, the world's getting more dangerous, not less.
Thank you, that's helpful. Councilmember Kramer.
So in talking to James Meese, our cybersecurity guy back home, he mentioned some of the same things that have been testified to here. There are certain localities that we know when something's coming in, it's probably suspect just because of where it's coming from. In 2023, we had a nation-state cyber actor get access to one of our network devices through a provider's chat. You wouldn't think that's a big deal, but in the process of chatting back and forth with other folks on that same system, they were able to get passwords, usernames, and later were able to go in and they got into the network where they could see what was going on. Fortunately, we were able to catch that before they were able to do anything. So it only cost us about 100 hours to fix it. We were grateful. Typically, these things, the problem is, as you guys well understand, if you don't spend the money up front to know what's coming, you're going to spend the money on the back end. And we talked earlier about local governments and rural communities. The real issue there is a lot of the rural communities, they don't have the resources to spend up front. And so they don't, and you don't have a choice about spending on the back end.
My time expired. Would you indulge me to allow the CISO from Connecticut, please, Mr. Raymond?
Thank you. I would say that very similar answer. We're seeing global interest in things that we do. If we put a device on the network, 5 minutes, it's being scanned by someone. So they're looking for the vulnerabilities that were being described for scanning earlier. The threats are data exfiltration, right? Stealing of data of intellectual property, ransomware, extortion of data. Business email compromise, I'd say phishing, targeting of leaders for passwords and those kinds of things are very common things that we see.
Thank you. That was helpful across the board. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'm going to continue along my line of question from before about changes. CISA and FEMA's role, are they good partners? Are they the ones who should be running this program? I mean, has it worked? Has it not? Jump in. Sure.
If I may, Mr. Chair, CISA has been an outstanding partner for us. We're really grateful for them and their commitment. We use them in a number of ways. They are active members of our Cyber Center, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Those relationships are extremely important. When a bad thing happens, it is so good to be able to have experts to reach out to and know who to call. CISA and FBI help provide that role for us. We're very grateful for their support. We also use CISA's services to do cybersecurity assessments of each of our agencies in the state across the board. We do that once every 3 years for all agencies, and they've been a tremendous partner for us.
Raymond, Kramer? Whoever.
Yeah, I completely agree. The the CISA team has brought great leadership and insight and expertise in terms of both what we can leverage, but to the earlier question, they've been fantastic in getting out to the local governments in helping them raise the understanding of what's available and how they need to be thinking about it. FEMA has been sort of a back office partner for the grant administration. I'd say less active in the delivery of the technology, but they've also been a great partner.
Yeah, I'd say baseline, been a great partner, really happy about what's going on so far. But the one-size-fits-all approach has been somewhat limiting. It limits some of the efficiencies. We would hope that Congress would create a more direct competitive grant fund with SLCGP for larger municipalities who can afford to take care of that on their own. I think that would be helpful. The other is we recommend an application process to be simplified to encourage participation by some of our smaller communities.
Simplified how?
The reporting processes are somewhat burdensome. Again, keep in mind, and some of my colleagues have already testified, very often these aren't full-time employees who are focused on A, applying for grants in the first place, and B, just the technical nature of it alone. And so if we could make it such that some of our less technical folks who are responsible for these highly technical responsibilities would be able to report more easily.
And currently Louisville, the city of Louisville, has to go through the state to get its grant, correct? It's administered by the state?
I don't believe so. I'd have to check. I think ours came directly to Metro Louisville, although it may have come through the state. So
Okay.
I'll withhold on that one.
But you're saying part of this pot of money would be, instead of having to go, it might be worthwhile to have some of the larger cities and municipalities be able to go directly to
Yes.
directly to FEMA to have some of the grants go instead of, okay. Now, you mentioned something about, for rural, the cost. They can't even come up with the cost share. How would we fix that?
Again, I think the program, the way that it's designed, if we could get that more quickly, more easily to municipalities, and again, when we talk about cities and rural, municipalities are still in those rural areas. They're just much smaller municipalities. In the state of Kentucky, and all the states actually, there's a league of cities, and the Kentucky League of Cities has been awesome to work with. It would be beneficial to local governments if the grant money were funneled or moved through that organization. They're more directly connected to what's going on in cities than the state is.
Okay. Mr. Raymond Fuller, you both have rural areas. I mean, what could we do more to help there? Because again, those are the municipalities that don't have the expertise. Even though the Pivot Act, the chairman is leading, would allow people to hire and be part of the service. So that's great. So nice little plug for the chairman's bill. Hopefully it passes. But go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if I may, so I felt like it was kind of ingenious to run it through the states because and 80% of the funding came through the states, but 80% of the funding to go to locals, and that allowed us, the state, to directly help those rural cities and counties and give them the help that they need. In some cases, we've been able to even to hire technical resources to help them implement the endpoint software, and we've been able to provide the training that they wouldn't have otherwise needed to do. So we've been able to we as a state have been able to make it super easy. We've just packaged it up and given it to them and even helped them implement it. So the way it's worked for us has been beautiful.
I would add that the match allows for a waiver depending on certain financial conditions. So I do believe that if people can't come up with the money to meet the match, they have a way to respond to that. However, I think people have been reluctant to use that in the expectation that that will slow down their award or perhaps not get it. They wouldn't be granted the match. And so I think there's some trepidation for people to put in for that match waiver that's preventing some of the uptake of it.
Wonderful. Mr. Huber, you mentioned something in your opening statement about lower the cost sharing requirements. Did you say that?
I did, yeah. I think there's opportunity, certainly with state municipalities, where it makes sense to provide shared services. So it increases the ROI for those services provided. As Mr. Fuller mentioned as well, you have expertise at the state level that can also be shared. They can hire additional resources there. So you have a known capacity providing resources to certainly rural and municipalities. I think that makes it more effective. And then the cost share component, which I mentioned earlier, is like you don't want to put so much pressure on a small organization that doesn't have somebody whose full-time job is applying for grants, trying to do that, right? Justifying that resource to do that. You want to put them in the best position to be successful, to deploy the technology to protect their organization.
Wonderful. And I'm out of time, but I'm the chairman, so I'm just going to ask one more question. So now we've had this hearing. It's our job to come back and to reauthorize this if we want and make any changes. So you're all the experts. You've all been dealing with this bill or this program. If you could all have, I want to hear from each one of you. If there was one change or fix made to this, what would it be? And we'll start with you, Mr. Huber.
I think you'd want to ensure that there's harmonization of any standards and compliance. You want this to be a cybersecurity exercise, raise the bar for cybersecurity, not a compliance exercise. Simple as that.
Thank you. Mr. Fuller?
I would just say continuity of funding. That would be the main thing. People feel hesitant that if the funding's not going to be there, that they're going to start into the program, and then the funding gets cut, and then they're left holding the bag, and that makes them hesitant to adopt.
So the authorization should be longer than for 4 years.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I concur with both my colleagues. And then I would add back in the one I mentioned a moment ago. And for large municipalities, if we could apply directly, I think that would be helpful. And then allow that organizations like municipal leagues would have an opportunity to work together as well.
Mr. Raymond?
I would say the ongoing sustainable funding and then ongoing assessments. You cannot manage what you don't measure. And so understanding what that cyber risk looks like is critical to this ongoing success.
Great. Well, I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony today and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for all of you, and we would ask that you all respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, this committee stands adjourned.